Hey guys, tonight we slip back to when humans first carved stories in stone, sparking history's memory. You probably won't survive this trip without a few sleepless nights imagining ancient hands scratching away with primitive tools. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're winding down with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. That you're standing in a world without glass windows, without Wi-Fi, without so much as a paper page to flip. The air smells faintly of wet clay and ash from the cooking fires. Somewhere nearby, a dog is barking at a goat for no apparent reason, which is about as close as you'll get to social media notifications. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to motivate us to create more under the shade of a mud brick wall. The temperature dips. Before you, a man crouches low over a smooth, square tablet of clay. His back curves like a question mark as he presses the tip of a reed into the soft surface, each motion precise, almost meditative. You watch his hands, roughened by years of fieldwork, moving with an odd gentleness. This is cuneiform, the earliest known writing system. Cuneiform comes from the Latin word cuneus, meaning wedge, because each mark is a tiny wedge pressed into clay. It first appeared in Mesopotamia more than 5,000 years ago, in the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And here's the plot twist. The earliest examples aren't love letters or poetry, they're basically shopping lists. You can almost imagine the conversation. What's that you're writing? Oh, just keeping track of how many goats you owe me. Romantic? No. Practical? Absolutely. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to motivate us to create more great grain harvests, livestock counts, trade agreements. Historians still argue whether the urge to write started from bureaucracy or storytelling. But it's clear that once humans had a way to capture words in a physical form, the world tilted on its axis just a little. You walk a few steps farther and notice a different kind of tablet. One that isn't a list at all, but something far stranger. The marks translate into an ancient riddle. Yes, even 5,000 years ago, people were leaving each other brain teasers. It's comforting, in a way, to know that fun facts existed before fun facts were even called that. The sun shifts in the sky, casting angled shadows across the walls. Your feet crunch softly on scattered bits of broken pottery, shards that once held wine, oil, or honey. If you pick one up and hold it to your ear, you can almost imagine the chatter of market stalls, the laughter of children, the faint clink of copper coins changing hands. That a warm breeze brushes your cheek, and you realize how fragile everything around you is. Without these clay marks, much of this world would have vanished entirely. Stories told aloud. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to motivate us to create stories carved into clay stand like stone pillars, holding steady long after the storytellers are gone. Here's a little-known fact. In the earliest days, clay tablets weren't fired in a kiln unless someone really wanted to preserve them. Most were simply dried in the sun. That means countless writings dissolved back into mud during floods or rainy seasons, lost forever. Somewhere under your feet, maybe just inches below, whole libraries have melted into the earth. That's history for you. It survives not because it's perfect, but because enough of it got lucky. You step inside a dim storage room. Shelves, well, more like stacks of reed mats, hold rows of tablets. They smell faintly of dust and time. Each one is heavy, more like a small brick than a notebook. You run your fingers over one, feeling the tiny grooves. The texture is cool, almost soothing, as if the clay remembers the hands that shaped it. A woman walks in, balancing a freshly pressed tablet. She sets it down with the care you might give to a sleeping cat. Her eyes meet yours briefly, and she smiles, though you're fairly sure she has no idea why a strangely dressed visitor has appeared in her workspace. You don't have the heart to tell her you're from thousands of years in the future. Best to let her think you're just a quiet neighbor. Somewhere outside, the sound of a wooden wheel turning mixes with the bleat of a sheep. Time here feels different, less urgent, more circular. You're aware that the marks on these tablets will still be here long after you and everyone in this town are gone. The thought is oddly calming, like leaving footprints on a beach where the tide takes centuries to come in. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some of the earliest recorded insults are also found on clay tablets. One scribe apparently decided to note that another scribe's work was sloppy. It's official. Petty office drama is at least 5 millennia old. You lean back against the wall and watch as another scribe begins to etch symbols. The rhythm of it is hypnotic. Press, lift, press, lift. Like a heartbeat recorded in clay. And you realize that writing didn't just record information, it changed the human brain. Suddenly, ideas could be built like towers, one thought laid neatly on top of another, rather than scattered like leaves in the wind. Historians still debate whether writing was inevitable or accidental. Was it a grand leap of human imagination, or just a happy side effect of needing to keep better tax records? You can almost hear the academic arguments echoing faintly between these mud walls. But for now, you let the voices fade and simply listen to the scratch of reeds in clay. Outside, the late afternoon light turns golden. Shadows stretch across the ground, long and lazy. You take one last look at the tablets before stepping back into the warmth. The air smells faintly of baked bread from somewhere nearby. You realize that for the people here, writing isn't mysterious. It's just part of the day, like tending goats or drawing water. But for you, it's a reminder that even the simplest marks can ripple across centuries, carrying quiet stories into the future. You step from the warm, dusty light of Mesopotamia into a place where the sun is sharper, the air drier, and every breath carries a faint trace of sand. Before you, the Nile glitters like a sheet of beaten bronze, its slow current whispering against the reeds. Behind you, the horizon stretches into endless desert, pale, silent, and patient. Ancient Egypt doesn't just greet you. It stares back at you with the calm confidence of a civilization that knows it will still be remembered thousands of years later. A falcon circles high overhead, its cry cutting the silence, and somewhere far off, you hear the deep, rhythmic thump of wooden mallets striking stone. That sound is the heartbeat of Egypt's great monuments, built one block, one breath, one lifetime at a time. You wander toward a cluster of workers, their linen garments clinging in the heat. They're smoothing massive limestone blocks for a tomb, not a king's this time, but a nobleman's. The air is alive with the smell of dust and sweat, yet there's a surprising rhythm to their work, almost musical. It's here you begin to understand. These stones aren't just walls. They're the skin of a storied eye in a nearby chamber. A scribe leans over a papyrus scroll. The reed pen in his hand moves with delicate precision, dipping into black ink made from soot and gum. He's recording offerings left for the dead, jars of beer, baskets of bread, and strangely enough, a rather generous portion of onions. Apparently, onions were not only for flavor, but also for their supposed magical properties. You can almost hear some long-lost Egyptian chef whispering, "Trust me, it works." Historians still argue whether the elaborate tomb rituals were purely religious or also political, a way for the living to prove their loyalty by honoring the dead. Either way, you can feel the weight of belief here. These people aren't just burying bodies. They're constructing entire worlds for the afterlife. You move deeper into the tomb's shadowy interior. The air cools instantly, and the faint scent of resin lingers. used to preserve mummies for the long journey ahead. Your footsteps echo softly against the painted walls, where images of boats, cattle, servants, and golden amulets float in a silent procession. The colors, though faded, still carry an almost unnatural vibrance. Deep reds, blues, and golds that seem immune to time. Here's a quirky tidbit. One recipe for ancient Egyptian sunscreen involved mixing crocodile dung with fermented plant oils. You shudder just imagining it, but in fairness, no one back then had SPF 50. They did, however, have a stunning knowledge of medicinal herbs and cosmetics, because looking good in both life and death was very much on the to-do list. That a breeze follows you as you step out of the tomb and into a courtyard where priests prepare for a ceremony. They move slowly, deliberately, their white linen robes fluttering in the hot wind. One carries a small brazier of burning incense, the smoke curling upward like invisible threads trying to stitch the sky. The scent is sharp and resinous, almost hypnotic. Across the courtyard, a group of women sing in low, steady tones, funeral songs meant to guide the soul to the afterlife. The melody is repetitive, lulling, as if it's designed to pull your thoughts into a slower rhythm. For a moment, you close your eyes and let the sound sink into you. The heat on your skin, the smell of incense, the steady chant. It's as if Egypt itself is breathing around you. You pass a massive statue of a seated pharaoh, its features worn smooth by centuries of wind. The stone is warm under your hand, and the scale of it is almost disorienting. You can't help but wonder how many sleepless nights went into shaping a single block. There's a strange intimacy to touching something that someone 3,000 years ago also touched. Maybe on the very day it was completed, just beyond the temple walls, the Nile's edge is lined with papyrus reeds swaying gently. A fisherman hauls in a net heavy with tilapia, the water dripping back into the river in slow, glistening threads. Life here is deeply tied to the river. Without it, the land is nothing but sand. With it, Egypt blooms into grain fields, date palms, and vibrant marketplaces. Historians still debate the true purpose of the Sphinx, guardian spirit, royal portrait, or both. But standing in its shadow now, you sense it's more than a riddle carved in stone. It feels like a silent conversation between the earth and sky, too patient to bother answering questions directly. As evening falls, the heat finally softens. The horizon turns pink, then gold, then a deep violet. Torches flare to life along the temple path, their flames shivering in the breeze. You hear the splash of a boat against the dock and the low murmur of voices, priests, traders, perhaps even a scribe returning from a royal summons. Somewhere in the quiet, you realize the power of Egypt's whispers. They don't just tell you what happened, they make you feel it. The cool stone, the echo of chants, the shimmer of gold leaf in torchlight, they're not frozen relics. They're living fragments of a civilization that refused to fade. You take one last look at the temple, its columns rising like giant papyrus stalks against the night sky. The stars here are sharper, closer somehow. You breathe in the dry air, let the silence settle into your bones, and step forward, carrying the whispers of Egypt with you. The dry Egyptian night fades into a softer dawn, and when you open your eyes, the world around you is no longer bound by golden sand and temple walls. You're standing on cracked, sun-baked earth, but the air here feels heavier, thicker with the scent of river mud and the distant tang of baked bread. The Tigris and Euphrates stretch out before you like two patient, winding ribbons, cradling the land between them. Mesopotamia, the land between rivers. You were here earlier in its infancy, but now centuries have passed, and it has grown into a tangled web of cities, temples, and markets. You step forward, into the shade of a towering ziggurat. The clay bricks are warm to the touch, the steps rising high like a staircase meant for gods. A woman carrying a basket of dates passes you without a glance, her sandals scuffing softly in the dust. The streets hum with the slow rhythm of early civilization. You hear a potter's wheel spinning in a nearby stall, the wet clay slapping in steady intervals. A little boy runs past, holding a small wooden toy cart, and his laughter echoes between the walls. Overhead, laundry flutters from ropes strung between houses, the bright fabric catching the morning light. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamia's true claim to fame was its innovation in governance or its restless creativity in everyday life. On one hand, it's here that kings began codifying laws, scribbled in cuneiform so no one could pretend they didn't know the rules. On the other hand, this was a culture that loved to experiment, brewing beer, building irrigation canals, and even recording the first known recipes. One of them, for beer, basically reads, "Make bread. Soak bread. Wait. Drink." You duck into a small courtyard where a scribe sits cross-legged with a clay tablet. His stylus moves with the same methodical patience you remember from that earlier, younger Mesopotamia. But now, the writing is different, not just lists of goods, but stories. One of the tablets contains part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving works of literature. The scribe pauses to stretch his fingers, then presses on, as if he knows this story will outlive him. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some tablets have been found with what are essentially draft marks, scribes testing their stylus or doodling in the margins. One even has a tiny drawing of a goat in the corner, which feels oddly like the world's first workplace doodle. You imagine some ancient boss shaking their head, muttering, "Focus, please." You step back into the sunlight and make your way toward the market. The smell of roasted onions and fresh bread fills the air. Merchants call out in sing-song voices, waving their wares, brightly dyed cloth, copper tools, glazed pottery. A musician plucks at a stringed instrument, the notes weaving through the crowd like a drifting thread. At the far end of the square, a group of men argue over a shipment of grain. Their voices rise and fall in a rhythm that's almost theatrical. You can't understand every word, but you recognize the familiar tone of a bargaining session. It's comforting to know that haggling over prices is at least 4,000 years old. Beyond the bustle, the riverbank glows in the late morning light. You see fishermen hauling in heavy nets, the water dripping from the catch in shimmering arcs. Children play in the shallows, splashing and shrieking with laughter. A man in a reed boat pulls past, his cargo hidden under woven mats. The river isn't just life here, it's a lifeline. It carries food, trade, and the stories of each city down its winding length. As you walk, you catch sight of a small shrine built into the corner of a wall. Offerings sit neatly on a low shelf, flowers, bread, and a tiny clay figure of a goddess. The air smells faintly of burned incense, the smoke curling upward like a silent prayer. Historians still debate whether the rise and fall of these Mesopotamian city-states was inevitable, an endless cycle of building, warring, and rebuilding, or if there was a moment when it all could have been different. Standing here, you feel the fragility of it. The walls are strong, but the river is stronger. The people are proud, but time is prouder. The sun climbs higher, and the marketplace begins to empty as people retreat to cooler rooms for the heat of the day. You find a shaded alcove and sit, the clay beneath you warm and solid. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a faint, rhythmic chant from the ziggurat steps, a prayer or perhaps just the steady murmur of life unfolding, one breath at a time. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sounds and smells fold over you. The whisper of the river, the soft grit of dust between your fingers, The knowledge that these streets will one day be ruins, but their stories will find their way into the hands of another scribe. When you stand again, the air feels heavier with the weight of what has been and what is to come. You take one last look at the towering ziggurat, its shadow stretching long across the earth, and step forward into the next chapter of history. The bustling riverbanks of Mesopotamia fade like a dream, and when your eyes open again, you're sitting under the gentle shade of an olive tree on a rocky hillside. A warm breeze stirs the branches above you, releasing the faint, peppery scent of the leaves. In the distance, whitewashed buildings cling to the slopes, their shapes sharp against the bright blue of the Aegean sky. Somewhere, a goat bleats in a tone that sounds suspiciously judgmental that you've arrived in ancient Greece. Not the Greece of warriors charging into battle, but the quieter Greece of open-air courtyards and the low hum of debate. Here, the most powerful weapon is not a sword, but a question. A few steps away, a group of men recline on cushions in a shaded colonnade. One gestures with a clay cup as he speaks, his words slow and deliberate. You catch fragments, names of gods, musings about the stars, and, at one point, a rather heated exchange about whether a fish can be truly happy. You realize you're eavesdropping on the very birth of philosophy. Historians still argue whether philosophy here was a product of leisure, something only the wealthy could afford to indulge in, or whether it emerged from a deeper human urge to understand existence. Either way, the air in this place feels charged with curiosity, as though the very stones have overheard centuries of "but why?" You wander through the agora, the open marketplace. It's alive with chatter, the smell of fresh figs and grilled fish drifting through the air. A merchant tries to sell you a hand-carved figurine of Athena, goddess of wisdom, though you suspect his real skill lies in persuading you that it's worth twice its actual value. At the edge of the square, a small crowd gathers around a man you instantly recognize from history books, Socrates. He's not as imposing as you expected, barefoot, in a plain tunic, and with the kind of expression you've seen on someone who's about to win an argument they don't even need to start. He asks simple questions, so simple they're almost disarming, until the poor soul he's talking to starts second-guessing their own name. Here's a quirky tidbit. Socrates never wrote down his ideas. Everything we know about him comes from the works of his students, like Plato, which means for all we know, he could have been completely misquoted for the past 2,000 years. Somewhere, Socrates might be rolling in his metaphorical grave, mumbling, "I never said that." Leaving the marketplace, you follow a narrow path up toward the edge of the city. The view opens, revealing the deep blue sea stretching endlessly to the horizon. Below, small fishing boats rock gently in the waves, their sails snapping softly in the breeze. The rhythmic sound is oddly meditative, like the universe breathing in and out. You pass a school where young boys recite lines of Homer in sing-song voices. Inside, the air smells faintly of wax and parchment. The teacher, a wiry man with a long beard, interrupts to lecture on the nature of virtue. His voice rises and falls in a cadence so steady it could lull you to sleep, if not for the occasional sharp clap of his hands when someone's attention drifts. Historians still debate the influence of Greek philosophy on later civilizations, but standing here, you can see its threads winding forward through time. The questions asked in these shaded courtyards will one day echo in Renaissance art studios, Enlightenment coffee houses, and, yes, even modern late-night debates on the internet. The sun dips lower, casting golden light across the marble columns of the Acropolis. The stone glows warm under your fingertips, each fluted pillar holding the weight of centuries. In the shadow of these temples, You can almost hear the quiet scratch of a chisel shaping the words and ideas that would survive long after the city's political power faded. You settle again under the olive tree as the air cools. A man nearby strums a lyre, the notes soft and wandering. The melody drifts into the darkening sky, carrying with it the murmurs of every philosopher who ever sat here, cup in hand, spinning the world into meaning. The cicadas start their evening chorus, and for a moment, time feels wide and slow. You take a deep breath of the warm, fragrant air and step forward, ready to carry these questions into the next stretch of history. The hum of Greek cicadas fades, replaced by the faint rustle of leaves and the measured crunch of gravel under your sandals. You're walking a road so straight and solid it looks as if it could outlast the earth itself. The air is warm, carrying the scent of pine and distant hearth fires. Overhead, a canopy of tall trees filters the sunlight into shifting patterns on the ground. You are in the Roman Empire, somewhere along one of its famous roads. These stone ribbons stitched together lands from Britain to Egypt, carrying soldiers, merchants, news, and, of course, gossip. The road beneath your feet is worn smooth by centuries of traffic, but it still holds firm, as if Rome itself refuses to crumble too quickly that a cart creaks past, pulled by a pair of sturdy mules. The driver gives you a nod but doesn't slow. His cargo is covered with heavy cloth, though you catch the faint smell of wine and olive oil. Behind him, a group of legionaries march in perfect rhythm, their armor clinking softly. The sound is almost soothing, like a metallic lullaby for those who can ignore the might crush you if needed vibe. Historians still argue whether Rome's greatness came more from its military strength or its infrastructure. But walking here, it's hard not to be impressed by the quiet power of organization. The road is wide enough for two carts to pass without trouble, with ditches on either side to keep it dry. You wonder how many engineers, laborers, and, let's be honest, very sweaty workers it took to make something this enduring. You pass under an arched milestone carved with Latin inscriptions, the edges worn smooth by centuries of wind and fingertips. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some milestones included not just distances, but compliments to the emperor, essentially ancient government billboards. You imagine travelers muttering under their breath, "Yes, Augustus, we know you're great. Can we just get to the next inn?" Up ahead, the road curves toward a small settlement. Red-tiled roofs peek out from between olive trees, and you hear the distant trickle of a fountain. Entering the town, you find a bustling forum, merchants calling out prices, children chasing each other around marble columns, and a baker sliding fresh loaves from a stone oven. The air smells of warm bread, herbs, and something faintly fishy from the nearby market stalls. At the far side of the square, you catch sight of a scribe seated at a wooden desk, copying letters with a steady hand. A courier waits nearby, ready to carry them to far-off provinces. You realize that just as roads moved people and goods, they also carried words, fast by ancient standards, though still laughably slow compared to your inbox today. As you stroll through the forum, a man in a worn tunic approaches, trying to sell you a small clay figurine of Mercury, the messenger god. "For luck on your travels," he says with a grin. You thank him, decline, and continue, though part of you thinks a little extra luck never hurt anyone walking into history. You follow the road again as it leaves the town, climbing a gentle hill. From the crest, you can see miles of countryside, fields of wheat rippling in the wind, clusters of villas surrounded by orchards, and in the distance, the faint silver line of another road stretching toward the horizon. The scale of it all makes you feel small, but not in a bad way. More like you're part of something sprawling and steadied. Here's another quirky fact. Some Roman roads had mansions, official rest stops where travelers could eat, sleep, and change horses. Think of it as a government-run motel chain, though probably with fewer decorative pillows. You pass one now, a low stone building with an open courtyard. The smell of stew drifts from inside, and a pair of travelers laugh over cups of watered wine as the day softens into evening. The road dips into a wooded valley. The rustle of leaves overhead mingles with the distant call of an owl. You realize that this road, like all of Rome's roads, was built not just to connect places, but to hold the empire together. Every step you take is another stitch in a vast, centuries-long tapestry. The light fades, and the air grows cooler. You pause, placing your palm against the smooth, ancient stones. They are warm from the day's sun, solid under your hand, as if they remember every footstep, every wheel, every whispered conversation that has passed this way. You walk on, the road stretching before you like an invitation you can't refuse, leading you toward the next quiet chapter of history. The Roman road narrows and fades, its stones giving way to softer earth beneath your feet. The air thickens with the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke, and the light here is muted, filtered through a low northern mist. You've stepped into early medieval Europe, where the names of kings echo faintly in the halls of history. But the names of queens are often just whispers in the margins. Ahead, a wooden palisade guards a small hill fort. Its gates creak open to reveal a courtyard bustling with activity. Smiths hammering at glowing iron, children chasing a chicken that clearly wants nothing to do with them, and women carrying baskets of bread fresh from the oven. Somewhere above it all, in a timber hall draped with woven banners, a queen sits in a high-backed chair. She is not the queen you'd find in grand oil paintings. No gold crown here, just a simple circlet of twisted silver resting on her brow. Her gown is heavy wool, dyed deep blue, and the weight of her gaze is enough to still the chatter of the hall. Beside her, a scribe murmurs as he records a treaty she has just negotiated with a neighboring lord. You realize this is one of those rare rulers whose power is woven quietly into the fabric of alliances, rather than shouted from a battlefield. Historians still argue whether women in early medieval Europe wielded more influence behind the scenes than the surviving records suggest, or whether we're simply filling in the silences with hopeful imagination. But as you watch her calmly direct the steward, rearrange the seating for a visiting envoy, and glance, just once, at the simmering pot of stew as if judging whether it needs more salt, you suspect she has her hands in everything. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some queens were known to use their own personal seals, carved with symbols unique to them, to sign documents instead of relying on the king's authority. In at least one case, a queen's seal was so recognizable that her letters were more respected than her husband's. That's medieval branding at its finest. You step outside into the misty air, where the sound of the blacksmith's hammer has become a steady heartbeat for the settlement. Beyond the walls, the landscape rolls gently, dotted with small farms and clusters of grazing sheep. You spot a woman in a hooded cloak walking a narrow path toward the woods, a basket swinging at her side. She's a healer, someone tells you, a keeper of herbal knowledge passed from mother to daughter. Her remedies are as much a part of this community's survival as the walls or the weapons to eye in the evening. The hall fills with the smell of roasting meat and the sound of lyres. The queen moves easily among her people, speaking with the traders, listening to petitions, sharing in the laughter at a bard story about a fox outwitting a pompous knight. There is no grand declaration of power here, just the quiet, deliberate weaving of relationships that will keep this fragile realm intact through the winter. As the firelight flickers across her face, you wonder how many queens like her lived and died without their names carried forward. Historians still debate whether our focus on kings is due to the reality of their dominance or simply the bias of the scribes who wrote the chronicles. But here, in this smoky, warm hall, it feels clear that some thrones were held just as firmly by women's hands, whether the history books admit it or not. You step back into the cool night. The mist clings to your hair, and the only light comes from a thin slice of moon. Somewhere in the darkness, the queen's banner flutters against the wind, its fabric worn but steady. It's a reminder that even in times when voices were hushed, some still carried far enough to echo through the centuries. You take one last look at the fortified hill, the faint glow of the hall's fire visible between the wooden slats, and you turn toward the next road history has waiting for you. The sound of the northern mist fades behind you as the road leads south, and soon you're stepping into the sunlit courtyards of Renaissance Europe. It's warmer here, the air fragrant with citrus blossoms drifting over high stone walls, and the streets are a mosaic of sound. Merchants calling out in Italian, French, and Spanish, horses clattering over cobblestones, and the occasional burst of music from a lute somewhere behind a shuttered window. The first queen you meet in this new chapter of history is not dressed for battle, nor wrapped in the heavy furs of the north. She glides through the palace gardens in a gown of silk, so fine it moves like water when she walks. A pair of ladies trails behind her, their arms stacked with letters sealed in crimson wax. Her face is calm, but her eyes, oh, they're measuring every conversation happening within earshot. You realize this is a woman trained not only in courtly grace, but also in the art of political maneuvering that the Renaissance perfected. Mainstream history remembers queens here as glittering ornaments of their husbands' courts, but the reality was more layered. Many acted as diplomats in their own right, arranging marriages between kingdoms, negotiating trade rights, and even mediating between warring factions. Historians still argue whether their influence was the quiet background hum of a harp or the unseen gears turning the entire mechanism of statecraft. Yet there's a quirky little fact you might enjoy. Some Renaissance queens commissioned artists to paint them not in realistic portraits, but in elaborate allegorical scenes. Imagine being depicted as the goddess of wisdom, standing on a floating island, with cherubs holding up your crown. It's like an early form of Instagram filters, but for political propaganda. Inside the palace, the queen's apartments are lined with tapestries depicting scenes from myth and history, each one a message in its own right. A woven panel showing the story of Penelope weaving and unweaving her loom might seem like simple decoration, but to a court insider, it's a statement: patience, cunning, and control over one's fate. You suspect the queen chooses these images carefully, knowing full well that the nobles and envoys who walk past will read meaning into every thread. A soft breeze carries the scent of ink and parchment from a small study nearby. You peek inside to see the queen at a desk, quill in hand, writing a letter in her own neat, slanted script. She's not dictating to a secretary tonight. These words are for her brother, a duke in another kingdom, and they carry a subtle blend of personal affection and political instruction. The candlelight glows against the curves of the letters, each stroke of ink a quiet ripple in the currents of European politics. Outside, the city hums into evening. The queen steps onto a balcony to watch torches light up the streets below. From here, you can see the domes and spires of cathedrals rising against the sunset. A troupe of musicians plays in the square, and the laughter of courtiers drifts up from the gardens where a masked ball has begun. The queen's mask rests on a small table beside her, ready for her entrance. But for now, she simply watches, as if taking the temperature of her realm before stepping into the performance. You walk with her through the hall as she finally descends into the ballroom. Chandeliers scatter light across swirling gowns and embroidered doublets, and the music swells. She moves through the crowd with perfect ease, greeting ambassadors in their own languages, remembering small details from past conversations. You notice the way her compliments are never random. They're calculated to draw out certain alliances, to make the right people feel seen. It's less about charm for its own sake and more about weaving a web, one silk thread at a time. But there's a moment when she pauses by a young artist displaying sketches of a planned fountain. She praises his work in front of the king, ensuring that the project will be funded. You catch the faintest smile when she turns away, knowing she's just secured another loyal supporter without ever discussing politics outright. Historians still debate whether such women were merely playing the roles expected of them, or whether they were quietly reshaping the power structures around them. Standing here, watching her slip seamlessly between languages, faces, and moods, you can't help but think it's the latter. The night wears on. Outside, the city settles into the hush of late hours, and the queen retreats once more to her private rooms. You notice a small book on her desk, a collection of poems in the original Greek. She turns a page slowly, her fingers lingering on the text, and you wonder how many people in her court know she reads this language fluently. Knowledge here is both armor and weapon, and she seems to understand that more than anyone. You leave her there, bathed in lamplight, with the faint sound of music still echoing from the ballroom below. As you step back into the night air, the palace walls loom high above, yet they seem almost weightless compared to the layers of influence swirling within them. The road east feels different under your feet, drier, dustier, the air carrying the warm spice of cinnamon and cardamom from a marketplace you can't yet see. The light shifts, too, softening into golden tones as if the sun itself is filtered through silk. Here, in the grand courts of Mughal India, queens were not just jewels but entire histories on their wrists, their ankles, their very breath. You find yourself walking through an arched gateway inlaid with semi-precious stones, each petal of each flower carved from a different gem. Inside, a courtyard blooms with fountains shaped like lotus buds, their water falling in gentle, rhythmic arcs that sound like whispers. The queen steps into view, her sari shimmering with threads of real gold, her anklets chiming softly with each step. She greets you not with a handshake, but with a slow, deliberate glance that feels both welcoming and assessing. Mainstream history tells you Mughal queens lived in seclusion, hidden away in the zenana, the women's quarters of the palace. But that's only the surface. Behind those carved marble screens, they were strategists, patrons of the arts, and often financial powerhouses. Some commanded entire trading fleets, others directed vast charitable projects. Historians still argue whether their influence was a quiet undercurrent or a decisive force steering imperial policy. But there's a curious tidbit you can't help but smile at. Some Mughal queens were rumored to have favorite perfumes so expensive that the cost of producing them could feed a small village for a year. One scent, made from rare Himalayan flowers, was said to linger in a room for days after the queen left, as if her presence refused to be forgotten. She leads you through a long corridor lined with jolly screens, marble latticework so intricate that it turns sunlight into lace. You can see the courtyards beyond, where peacocks wander freely among mango trees. The queen pauses at a window to watch a group of scribes, their reed pens dancing over palm leaf manuscripts. A letter in Persian script catches her eye. You catch the faintest curve of her lips as she reads something amusing. Her private chambers are a mosaic of color, cushions embroidered in deep reds and blues, low tables inlaid with mother-of-pearl, the air warm with the scent of sandalwood incense. She gestures for you to sit on a cushion beside her, and offers you a small silver cup of sherbet, cool and sweet with pomegranate. As you sip, she speaks of poets she has commissioned, of gardens she has designed, of diplomatic gifts she has sent to foreign rulers, always with the understanding that beauty can be as persuasive as an army. When she rises, it is to oversee the evening's mehfil, a private gathering of music and poetry. Musicians tune their sitars while a court poet prepares to recite verses so carefully crafted they seem to shimmer in the air. The queen listens, her head slightly tilted, eyes half closed as if absorbing every syllable. When she claps softly at the end, it is both appreciation and decree. What she enjoys will flourish, what she ignores will fade. Outside, the moon has risen, bathing the marble domes in silver light. The queen walks the terrace with you, pointing out constellations as if they were personal acquaintances. Somewhere far below, the city buzzes with life, markets still open, vendors calling out in the warm night air. From here, it feels like another world entirely, one that she can touch or ignore at will. Historians still debate how much real political authority Mughal queens wielded compared to their male counterparts. But as you watch her lean over the balcony, eyes on the horizon, you sense that influence doesn't always need to be signed into law. It can simply radiate from the person everyone watches, even when she says nothing at all. The night deepens, and the queen disappears behind a curtain of gold-embroidered silk, leaving you with the soft echo of ankle bells fading into silence. You turn away, carrying with you the scent of jasmine and sandalwood, the memory of her measured words, and the sense that power here flows as much through beauty as through decree. The desert greets you with a stillness so complete it feels like the air itself is holding its breath. The horizon stretches in every direction, a pale golden sea under a cloudless sky. Heat shimmers in the distance, bending the shapes of dunes into slow, graceful waves. You step onto the fine, powdery sand, your boots sinking with each step, the grains warm as though the earth is storing the sun's touch. Ahead, a fortress rises from the desert like something conjured from a mirage. Walls of sun-baked clay and sandstone glowing amber in the late afternoon light. You've arrived in the heart of the ancient Berber kingdoms, where the queen is not draped in fragile silks, but wrapped in a robe of indigo cloth, its deep blue made from a dye so precious it marks her as unmistakably royal. The air here carries a faint tang of camel leather, firewood, and the earthy sweetness of dates drying in the sun. She meets you at the gate with a firm handshake, the kind that makes you instantly aware this is no ceremonial ruler. This is a leader forged by sandstorms and caravan trails. Mainstream history will tell you Berber queens like Tin Hinan were figures of legend, half historical, half myth. Yet even the legends paint them as warriors, negotiators, and the steady hands that kept trade routes flowing. Here's a quirky detail. Some oral traditions claim that Tin Hinan's sandals, buried with her, had soles so thick they could leave tracks on stone. Whether that's poetic exaggeration or a metaphor for her indelible impact, historians still argue whether her grave in the Hagar Mountains truly holds her remains or someone else entirely. She leads you to the inner courtyard, shaded by date palms whose fronds rustle softly in the warm breeze. A stone trough holds water drawn from a deep well, cool and clear. Merchants are gathered in the shade, their caravans laden with salt, gold, and dyed fabrics. You can hear them negotiating prices in a mix of Berber, Arabic, and half a dozen trade tongues you don't recognize. The queen sits cross-legged on a low rug, her sword resting casually beside her as she oversees the caravan's arrival. Every so often she interjects, not loudly, but with a precision that shifts the entire conversation. You realize she's not just ensuring fair trade. She's maintaining the balance between tribes, merchants, and the long, fragile chain of relationships that make survival in the desert possible. As the sun lowers, she invites you to share a meal. Flatbread still warm from the fire, lamb stew spiced with cumin and coriander, and sweet mint tea poured from a silver pot held high, so the stream cools before it reaches the cup. The tea is strong, almost medicinal, but with a sweetness that lingers. When the stars appear, they do so all at once, brighter and more numerous than you've ever seen. The queen gestures upward, tracing constellations with her finger, telling you which ones guide caravans toward water, which ones warn of sandstorms. She speaks in a voice that's both matter-of-fact and poetic, as if the desert has taught her that beauty and practicality are often the same thing. Historians still debate whether Berber queens were elected, inherited their positions, or simply seized them through force and charisma. The truth may be all three, shifting with time and circumstance like the dunes themselves. As the night deepens, drums begin to beat, a slow, steady rhythm matched by the stamping of feet as dancers form a circle. The queen joins, her robe flowing as she moves, her face lit by the fire. She laughs, not as a monarch holding court, but as a woman among her people. And in that moment, it's clear that her authority is not carved in stone or inked on parchment. It lives in the trust of those around her, and in the vast, silent respect of the desert. When the drums fade and the fire burns low, you feel the chill of the desert night settling in. The queen bids you rest, her voice low, carrying easily in the still air. You wrap yourself in a blanket and lie beneath a sky that feels close enough to touch, the memory of her steady gaze lingering long after your eyes close. The morning sun rises with a pale gold that softens the edges of the stone walls around you. The air is cool, almost crisp, a brief mercy before the heat will sweep in again. You follow a narrow path between low, mud-brick buildings until it opens into a marketplace alive with color and sound. Brass trays gleam in the light, pyramids of saffron and paprika rise like miniature dunes, and strings of dried figs sway gently from wooden stalls. That you're in a bustling oasis town along the old trans-Saharan trade route, where the desert's monotony breaks into a sudden explosion of life. This is where the queen you met last night sends her emissaries to keep commerce flowing, because even the most independent kingdom knows survival here depends on trade. Mainstream history tells us that caravans brought not just gold and salt, but also knowledge, astronomy from the East, mathematics from the Mediterranean, and even medical herbs from lands you might never see. There's a quirky tidbit the guide mentions while you're browsing. Some merchants swore their camels could remember every turn in a 1,000-mile journey, but only if they'd been fed a special mix of dates and fenugreek before departure. Historians still argue whether that was a real dietary trick or just a clever way to sell overpriced camel snacks to worried traders. You pause near a storyteller's corner where an elder in a white turban recounts the tale of a caravan that followed the wrong star and ended up lost for weeks, until they were rescued by a band of nomads who spoke no common language, yet shared their food and water without question. His voice is slow and melodic, drawing a crowd that leans in, not to catch every word, but to be wrapped in the rhythm. The scent of fresh bread from a nearby oven distracts you, and before you know it, you're sitting at a low wooden table with a steaming flatbread, dipping it into a bowl of chickpeas in a tomato and garlic broth. The vendor, a cheerful woman with henna-dyed fingertips, asks where you're from. When you tell her, she laughs softly and says, "Ah, then you've come far for our bread. But trust me, it's worth it." She's not wrong. A bell rings from somewhere deep in the market. Traders begin loading goods onto their camels. Bales of indigo cloth, sacks of salt heavy enough to strain the ropes, carved ivory pieces small enough to fit into a pouch. The air fills with the clinking of metal, the snorting of camels, and the shuffle of hundreds of feet moving in practiced patterns. You follow one caravan out to the edge of town, where the last clusters of palm trees give way to open desert once more. The caravan leader, a man with a beard threaded with gray, explains that they'll travel mostly at night, when the heat is less brutal, guided by the stars the queen showed you. He offers to let you ride with them for a while. Under the fading afternoon light, the caravan moves in a slow, steady rhythm, each camel swaying with the same hypnotic motion, each rider quiet, conserving breath and energy. The sand underfoot shifts in soft sighs, and in the distance, you see what looks like a pool of water, but you know better than to trust the desert's mirages. Historians still debate whether the great trans-Saharan routes were first mapped by chance or by meticulous planning. Some say the wind simply revealed the right valleys to follow. Others argue there were scouts long before the caravans who knew the safest crossings. Whatever the truth, the fact remains that thousands of lives depended on those invisible lines across the sand. By nightfall, you're deep into the journey, the stars bright enough to light your way without a torch. The leader points out the Southern Cross, telling you how it never fails to guide travelers toward the nearest well. You think of the queen again, her steady presence, her practical wisdom, and realize that her power extends far beyond the walls of her city. It lives in the trust of the merchants, the safety of the caravans, and the knowledge that every journey out here is part of something much bigger than itself. The morning sun rises with a pale, buttery gold that seeps gently over the horizon, softening the hard edges of the stone walls around you. The light catches in the dust hanging in the air, turning every particle into a tiny spark. You stretch your arms, still feeling the faint ache from yesterday's climb to the Queen's watchtower, and step into the coolness of the early day. A brief, delicate mercy before the desert heat will inevitably sweep over everything again like a relentless tide. You follow a narrow path between squat, mud brick buildings, the walls warm from years of sun, until it opens into a marketplace that instantly swallows you in its sounds and colors. Brass trays and bowls gleam like captured sunlight. Pyramids of saffron, paprika, and turmeric rise in careful symmetry, their fragrances blending into a heady perfume that clings to your clothes. Strings of dried figs and dates sway gently from wooden beams, creaking like sleepy wind chimes. Somewhere nearby, a merchant calls out in a sing-song voice, offering almonds sweet as the smile of your first love, which, you suspect, is not entirely a fixed unit of measurement. You've wandered into a thriving oasis town along the ancient trans-Saharan trade route, a place where the endless monotony of sand is broken by a sudden, defiant burst of life. Here, the queen you met last night keeps the lifeblood of her kingdom flowing through diplomacy and commerce. Mainstream history tells us that these routes carried far more than gold and salt. They were arteries for knowledge, astronomy from scholars in the East, complex mathematics from Mediterranean traders, and medicinal herbs from lands whose names are half whispered, half imagined. A guide with sun-browned skin and a sharp grin leans toward you to share a quirky tidbit. Some camel masters swore their animals could remember every turn in a 1,000-mile journey, but only if they were fed a secret blend of dates and fenugreek before setting out. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine dietary trick or merely a clever upsell by entrepreneurial spice sellers. Either way, you're tempted to buy some, just in case your memory could use the same magic. You pause near a shaded corner where an elder, his beard white as ground salt, sits cross-legged on a woven mat. Around him, a small crowd leans in as he spins a tale in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. His story is of a caravan that followed the wrong star and wandered in circles for weeks, until they were found by nomads who shared their water without asking for payment. Not because they understood each other's language, but because hospitality here is older than words. His voice has that low, melodic hum that seems to bypass your ears and settle directly into your bones. The scent of fresh bread, warm and yeasty, drifts from a nearby clay oven. Without quite realizing how, you find yourself seated at a low wooden table, tearing into a flatbread still steaming from its bake. You dip it into a bowl of chickpeas simmered in tomato and garlic, the flavors bright and earthy all at once. The woman who serves it to you wears a patterned scarf and has fingertips stained with henna. She asks, in a lilting accent, where you've come from. When you tell her, she laughs softly and says, "Then you've traveled far for our bread. But you will remember it when the wind sings at night." You think she might be right. A bell rings from somewhere deep in the market. Traders begin to stir, their movements practiced. Goods are lifted, sorted, and strapped to the sides of kneeling camels. Bales of indigo cloth so rich they seem to drink the sunlight. Sacks of crystalline salt heavy enough to make the ropes creak. Carved ivory small enough to vanish into a single pouch. The air is alive with the clinking of metal weights, the soft groans of animals rising to their feet, and the shuffle of hundreds of sandals and boots across packed earth. You trail a caravan to the edge of the town, past the last stubborn clumps of palm trees, and into the open embrace of the desert once more. The leader, a tall man with a beard streaked in silver, explains that they will travel mostly under the cloak of night, guided by the unchanging stars. He gestures toward the horizon and asks if you'd like to ride with them for a while. Under the slow melting of the afternoon, the caravan moves with a rhythm older than any written map. Each camel sways like a small ship in a shallow sea, each rider quiet, conserving breath and strength. The sand shifts under their wide feet with a soft sigh, erasing their footprints almost as soon as they are made. Far ahead, the shimmer of a mirage dances, a pool of water that you know will vanish as you approach, but still your eyes can't help lingering on it. Historians still debate whether the first great trade routes were born of lucky chance, following the valleys the wind had cleared, or from deliberate, methodical scouting by those who understood the desert better than anyone alive today. Whatever the truth, every grain of sand here has been crossed by the weight of human footsteps and ambition. Thousands of lives have depended on invisible lines stretched across this vast emptiness. By nightfall, the desert transforms. The heat eases its grip, replaced by a gentle, cool breath. The sky bursts into constellations so vivid they look painted, and the leader points to the Southern Cross, telling you it never fails to guide travelers toward the nearest well. You glance at the faces around you, traders, guards, apprentices, each lit by starlight, each trusting the path as if it has always been there. You think of the queen again, her calm certainty, her practical wisdom, and realize her power stretches far beyond the walls of her city. It lives in the trust of these merchants, the safe return of each caravan, and the quiet knowledge that every journey is part of something larger than itself. The sea is calm, almost suspiciously so, as if it has been holding its breath for centuries and has finally exhaled into stillness. You stand on the deck of a tall ship, the wooden boards beneath your feet warm from the midday sun. The horizon stretches in every direction, an unbroken line where the blue of the sky melts into the darker blue of the ocean, making you feel as if you are floating between two infinite mirrors. Around you, sailors move with a kind of slow, practiced precision. The air is thick with the smell of tar, salt, and rope, a scent that clings to their hair, their clothes, even the deep cracks in their hands. Somewhere overhead, a seagull cries, the sound thin and sharp against the vast silence. The ship's sails billow gently, the canvas catching the light so it glows like bone in the sun. Your captain is a broad-shouldered man with a weathered face, the skin around his eyes etched in deep creases from squinting at horizons far longer than you've been alive. He stands at the wheel, one hand resting lazily on the polished wood, the other holding a brass spyglass that glints each time it catches the sun. "We're chasing a shadow," he says, almost to himself. "And if we're lucky, it's the kind that can be caught." The age of exploration was never just about gold or spices, though there was plenty of both. It was about curiosity, an almost childlike refusal to believe the map was complete. Ships like this carried not just goods but ideas, languages, diseases, and dreams. Every voyage left the world a little bigger and, paradoxically, a little smaller. Below deck, you find the ship's cartographer hunched over a desk littered with ink pots, quills, and curling sheets of parchment. The air smells faintly of whale oil from the lamps, mixed with the bitter tang of ink. He's carefully tracing a coastline, his hand steady despite the subtle sway of the ship. He tells you that some maps are built from rumor and wishful thinking as much as from observation, that sometimes the sea itself seems to conspire, offering islands to the eye that vanish as you approach. A young cabin boy interrupts to bring him a cup of watered wine, his bare feet making no sound on the planks. He grins at you and whispers that he's seen flying fish leap beside the ship at dawn, silver bodies flashing like tossed coins before vanishing back into the waves. His voice carries a mix of awe and routine, as though the extraordinary is simply part of daily life here. Up on deck again, you watch as the ship's cook prepares the midday meal. A large pot bubbles over a small brazier, releasing the scent of salted pork, onions, and hardtack softened in broth. It's not exactly a feast, but it fills the belly and keeps the crew steady. A few sailors sit cross-legged nearby, mending torn sails with thick, waxed thread. Their fingers work automatically, as if the cloth is an extension of their own skin. By afternoon, the wind begins to pick up, ruffling the water into small, choppy waves. The ship leans slightly into the breeze, and the ropes above your head groan softly under the new tension. Far off, dark clouds gather, their edges tinged with an unsettling green. The captain glances toward them but says nothing, his jaw tightening. Storms at sea are strange things. They arrive faster than seems possible, turning the world from light to shadow in minutes. The air grows heavy, and the first drops of rain feel almost warm as they strike your skin. The sea, moments ago a placid expanse, begins to rise and breathe in great heaving swells. Sailors move quickly now, voices sharp but calm, pulling ropes and lashing down anything that might shift. The ship groans, a deep sound that seems to come from its very bones. You grip the rail as the waves rise, each one lifting you toward the sky before dropping you into a valley of green-black water. Spray lashes your face, salty and stinging. The storm is not cruel, just insistent, reminding everyone on board that they are small guests on an endless host. Hours later, the clouds thin and break, revealing a sky streaked with pink and gold. The sea flattens again, though it still heaves with the slow afterbreath of the storm. The crew moves more easily now, some laughing in low voices, others too tired for anything but a nod. The captain smiles faintly and says, "She's tested us. Now we see where she wants us to go." Night falls quickly at sea. The stars emerge one by one, until the sky is thick with them, a scattered map as vast and intricate as any chart in the cartographer's cabin. A sailor points out the North Star, steady and unmoving, the ancient guide for countless journeys. Another traces the line of Orion's belt with his finger, telling you that his father taught him the same pattern when he was a boy. The ship rocks gently now, its creaks and sighs blending with the sound of the waves against the hull. Somewhere in the dark, a musician plucks a tune on a weathered lute, the notes drifting out over the water until they dissolve into the night. You close your eyes and feel the rhythm of the sea beneath you, a slow, steady heartbeat that has carried explorers across centuries. In this moment, you understand why people once risked everything to push into the unknown. The sea is not just a barrier, it is a promise. And as the ship glides forward into the starlit darkness, you realize that the tide itself seems to be whispering an invitation, patient and endless. Come and see. The first thing you notice is the smell. It drifts toward you in warm, invisible waves. Cardamom and cinnamon, saffron and cloves, mingling with the richer scent of roasting lamb and fresh flatbread. It's as if the air itself has been seasoned. You stand at the edge of a bustling market somewhere along the Silk Road, though the exact city is hard to say. It could be Samarkand, Bokhara, Kashgar, each a jewel in the long chain of trade routes that stitched continents together for over 1,000 years. The ground beneath your feet is hard-packed earth, smoothed by the countless footsteps of merchants, pilgrims, and travelers. Stalls crowd the narrow streets, their awnings of faded cloth fluttering gently in the warm breeze. The chatter here is a music of many tongues: Persian, Arabic, Turkic, Chinese, and languages you don't recognize at all. It's a constant hum, punctuated now and then by the call of a trader boasting the quality of his goods, or the deep, rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer from somewhere nearby. You pass a stall where bolts of silk are stacked in shimmering layers. The merchant, a man with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that crinkle when he smiles, lets you run your fingers over the cloth. It's so smooth it almost feels like water, the colors shifting with the light. Deep blues like a twilight sky, bright reds like pomegranate seeds, golds that seem to hold the sun itself. He leans in and tells you, in halting words, that the silk came from far to the east, from a place where the mulberry trees grow thick and the worms spin threads finer than any other in the world. A few steps away, you hear the steady beat of a drum. It draws you toward a small square where performers have gathered a crowd. A man in a tall, conical hat balances on a rope strung between two poles, his arms spread wide, his feet moving in slow, careful steps. Below him, a boy with quick hands juggles brightly painted balls, tossing them higher and higher until they blur against the sky. The crowd claps and cheers, and for a moment, you forget that this is a place of trade. It is also a place of stories and wonder. A young woman selling spices invites you to smell a jar of powdered turmeric. The scent is earthy and warm, and when she pours a little into your palm, it stains your skin a bright, sunny yellow. She laughs softly and tells you it will take days to wash off. Beside her, baskets overflow with dried figs, almonds, pistachios, and dates so glossy they look as if they've been brushed with oil. Deeper into the market, you find the section where goods from far-off lands are laid out like treasures. There are Venetian glass beads that catch the light in tiny rainbows, Damascus steel blades with swirling patterns in their metal, and porcelain cups painted with delicate blue flowers. Each object has traveled farther than most people ever will in a lifetime. The Silk Road was never just one road. It was a web stretching over deserts, mountains, and seas, carrying not only goods but also beliefs, art, and ideas. Here, a Buddhist monk might meet a Muslim scholar. A Nestorian Christian might trade with a Hindu merchant. Languages intertwined, recipes traveled, and styles of dress blended until they became something entirely new. As you walk, the sun begins to lower, turning the dust in the air to gold. Merchants light small oil lamps, their flames flickering against the deepening blue of the evening. The smell of roasting meat grows stronger, and somewhere, a musician begins to play a reed flute. The sound is plaintive and slow, curling through the air like smoke that a man selling tea beckons you over. He pours from a long-spouted brass pot into tiny cups painted with chipped flowers. The tea is dark and strong, flavored with mint, and so hot it steams in the cool evening air. You sip slowly, feeling the warmth spread through your chest. Around you, the market has shifted into a softer rhythm. Deals are still being made, but now they are sealed with nods and quiet words rather than shouted offers. The storyteller sets up a small carpet and begins his tale. Children gather at his feet, and even a few tired merchants pause to listen. His voice rises and falls like a tide, carrying you through stories of heroes and monsters, of journeys across mountains higher than clouds and deserts so vast they could swallow whole caravans. The words feel older than the road itself, as if they were the first cargo ever carried here. Night settles fully now. The stars appear in clusters, brighter than you've ever seen, unchallenged by the glow of any city. Somewhere beyond this market, caravans are still moving, slow shapes in the dark, bells on their camels chiming softly. They will walk through the night, guided by the same stars you see overhead, their footsteps adding to the countless ones that have worn these paths smooth. You realize that what connects this place to the far corners of the earth is not just trade. It is the simple human desire to share, whether that's a length of silk, a jar of saffron, or a story told under a sky full of stars. The market breathes around you, alive with centuries of whispers, as if it knows you are only passing through, yet will carry its memory with you for the rest of your days. The wind carries fine grains of sand across your face, stinging lightly before settling into the folds of your clothes. It's a dry wind, the kind that seems to whisper as it moves, like a voice just beyond hearing. You stand at the edge of a low, sun-baked ruin in the heart of the Sahara. The horizon stretches endlessly, a pale gold under a cloudless sky. But here, beneath your feet, lies something far older and more precious than the shifting dunes above. They call this place the Lost Library of the Desert. Not a library in the sense of towering shelves and echoing halls, but rather a network of small, stone-walled rooms, each one once packed with manuscripts. Centuries ago, caravans brought them here, texts wrapped in cloth, tucked into leather cases, carried by camel across thousands of miles. Scholars say the oldest pieces may date back to the 12th century, though some believe fragments could be far older. You duck inside one of the rooms. The air changes immediately, cooler, quieter, heavy with the scent of earth and the faint, musty aroma of parchment and ink. Light seeps in through a small hole in the wall, painting a soft square on the floor. You kneel, brushing away a thin layer of sand, and find a wooden chest, its surface carved with faded geometric patterns. Inside are bundles of manuscripts, their edges worn, their ink a deep brown. Some are written in flowing Arabic calligraphy, the letters curling and looping like vines. Others bear strange scripts you don't recognize, symbols from distant kingdoms, some long vanished from the maps. You pick one up, careful not to disturb the fragile paper. The words speak of astronomy, the cycles of the moon, the movement of the planets, the calculation of eclipses. You realize these were not just religious or literary works. They were repositories of science, history, medicine, and law. Outside, a guide tells you stories passed down from the local community. In times of danger, when invaders threatened or the sands swallowed villages, families would hide manuscripts beneath their homes, or bury them in clay jars deep in the dunes. They understood that these were treasures greater than gold. A single book might contain generations of knowledge, painstakingly copied by hand, one letter at a time. You imagine the scribes at work, sitting cross-legged on woven mats, a small oil lamp flickering beside them, their reed pens scratching gently across the page. Each stroke deliberate, each margin carefully measured. Sometimes, a mistake would be scraped away and the surface smoothed with a small stone before rewriting. It could take months, even years, to complete a single volume. The guide leads you to another room where a low table holds maps of ancient trade routes. Fine lines mark the paths of caravans, spidery threads stretching from Timbuktu toward the Mediterranean, from Cairo to the Niger River, from Marrakesh deep into West Africa. These were the arteries that carried both goods and ideas. A merchant might bring salt or gold one way, and return with manuscripts or scholars the other. Evening approaches, and the temperature drops quickly. The desert sky turns a dusky purple, and the first stars appear. You sit on a flat stone outside the ruins, watching the light fade. A young boy from the nearby village joins you. In his hands, he holds a small, hand-bound book, its cover worn, but the pages inside still crisp. He tells you, in careful words, that it belonged to his grandfather and his grandfather before him. It is a collection of poems, some written by famous scholars, others by unknown hands. He recites one softly, his voice blending with the sigh of the wind. The poem speaks of journeys, across sand and sea, through hardship and joy, and of the importance of carrying one's heritage like a flame, passing it from one hand to the next. You realize this library is not entirely lost. It lives on in the memory of those who guard it, in the spoken words that drift from one generation to another. Night deepens. Somewhere far off, you hear the soft bells of a camel caravan moving under the stars. In the stillness, you think of the manuscripts hidden here, safe from the storms of time. They are fragile, yes, but also resilient, having survived centuries of shifting sands and human upheaval. You wonder how many stories in our own time will endure so long. As the boy finishes the last verse, he closes the book and smiles. The stars above seem impossibly bright now, as if each one is another story waiting to be found. You stand, brushing sand from your clothes, and take one last look at the ruins. They are quiet, unassuming, easy to miss in the vast desert. But beneath that surface lies a vault of human memory, patient and enduring, waiting for those who care enough to look. The wind rises again, carrying with it the same grains of sand that once blew across the faces of traders, scholars, and scribes hundreds of years ago. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you can almost hear their voices, low and careful, as if reading from the pages themselves. The narrow street smells faintly of rain on cobblestone, though the sky above is already clearing. A thin mist clings to the air, softening the edges of the crooked houses that lean toward each other as if sharing secrets. You step carefully over a puddle, following a faint ticking sound, not from any modern wristwatch, but something slower, older, almost heartbeat like .it leads you to a small wooden door set into a stone wall. The door is warped with age, its paint peeling, but the brass handle gleams as if polished every morning. You knock once, and the sound seems to disappear into the thick silence of the lane. Then the door creaks open, revealing a tall man with a pair of delicate magnifying lenses strapped over his right eye. His voice is low, almost conspiratorial. "You've come for the clocks." Inside, the room is dim, lit by only a few oil lamps. The walls are lined with shelves, each crammed with pocket watches, pendulum clocks, and strange contraptions whose purposes you can't immediately guess. A workbench sits in the center, covered in tools so precise they look like they belong in a surgeon's kit. The clockmaker moves with quiet confidence, his fingers long and steady, his steps barely making the floorboards creak. You notice that not all the clocks show the same time. Some are set to the local hour, others to faraway cities, and a few to dates that make no sense at all, like 12 o'clock, year 1492. The man explains, almost absent-mindedly, that he repairs historical timepieces for collectors and museums, but also keeps a few odd ones for himself. Historians still argue whether a certain massive water clock from ancient China could really keep accurate time to the second. But here, in this workshop, the boundary between possible and impossible feels blurred. He hands you a watch no bigger than a plum. The case is silver, engraved with tiny vines. When you open it, you see the gears inside turning so smoothly they're almost hypnotic. But it's the back cover that catches your attention, a miniature map of the Mediterranean, etched so finely you can see even the islands. He says it once belonged to a merchant in Venice who used it not just for the hour, but to time sea voyages. One turn of the crown could shift the hands to a second dial, which measured the days since leaving port. The clockmaker moves to another shelf and brings down something stranger, a tall, narrow clock encased in glass. The pendulum swings slowly, and with each tick, a mechanical bird on top turns its head slightly. Every hour, he tells you, it chirps not a song but a single note from a forgotten melody. Over the course of the day, the full tune plays, a kind of musical calendar for those who listen closely. Some say the melody was a code, carrying messages for a resistance group during an old war, though there's no proof. You lean against the workbench, letting the rhythmic ticking wash over you. It's a strangely soothing sound, like rain against a window or the breathing of someone asleep nearby. The clockmaker works in silence for a while, replacing a gear the size of a sesame seed, his eyes narrowing in concentration. Then, without looking up, he tells you about his great-grandfather, who supposedly built a clock that could run for a century without winding. No one has ever found it, but in the back of the workshop stands a locked cabinet that he never opens in front of strangers. Curiosity tugs at you, but you respect the quiet boundaries of the space. Instead, you wander toward the far wall, where a massive wall clock stands nearly to the ceiling. The face is painted with constellations, and the hands move in strange, staggered patterns. He explains that it's an astronomical clock, one that charts not just hours but lunar phases, solstices, and the positions of certain planets. Medieval towns in Europe sometimes had public versions of these, towering over marketplaces, their turning gears a public reminder of the cosmos ticking away above that a faint chime rings from somewhere high in the rafters. The clockmaker glances at a small hourglass on his bench and flips it over, as if the sound signaled a private ritual. You watch the sand begin to fall, the grains catching the light in their descent. The moment feels suspended, as though the room exists outside of ordinary time, protected from the rush of the world beyond the door. That he offers you tea, served in a cup painted with tiny, delicate clock faces. The steam curls upward, mingling with the faint smell of oiled metal and old wood. You sip slowly, the warmth spreading through you, while the various clocks tick in their own gentle rhythms. Some are slow and deliberate, others quick and restless, but together they create a layered lullaby, a soundscape of centuries. Before you leave, he presses something small into your palm. It's an old key, worn smooth. For when you find the door, he says, but doesn't explain further. The weight of it is comforting. Even if you don't yet know what it opens, you step back into the street. The rain has stopped entirely, and a pale moon hangs low over the rooftops. Behind you, the faint ticking continues, spilling into the night air, marking time in a way that feels both ancient and new. You walk on, the key warm in your pocket, the clock still echoing in your ears. Each tick a reminder that every moment is both fleeting and infinite. You follow a narrow trail downhill, the sound of water growing louder with each step. The air here is cooler, carrying the scent of wet earth and moss. Trees arch overhead, their leaves whispering in the breeze, and the path eventually opens onto the shore of a small, perfectly still lake. The surface mirrors the sky so clearly it feels like standing at the edge of another world. In the center of the lake rises a small stone tower, its base submerged. The stones are dark with age, worn smooth by countless seasons of wind and rain. A wooden boat rests against the shore, its oars already laid across the seats, as if waiting for you. You step in carefully, the wood rocking gently under your weight, and begin to row toward the tower. Halfway across, you notice faint ripples spreading outward, not from your oars, but from somewhere below. The water here is so clear that you can see pale shapes beneath the surface, shapes that look unsettlingly like books. Stacks of them, resting in the sand, their pages fluttering as if stirred by a breeze that shouldn't exist underwater. The tower's single door is carved with strange patterns, waves, spirals, and tiny fish, each etched with astonishing precision. The key from the clockmaker's workshop fits perfectly in the lock. The door opens inward with a sigh, revealing a spiral staircase that descends instead of climbs. You begin to follow it down, the light from the open doorway fading until only small glass spheres along the walls glow faintly, illuminating your way. The stairs lead to a vast chamber lit by a soft blue glow. Water shimmers just inches above your head, as though you're standing beneath the surface of the lake, but protected by some invisible barrier. Shelves upon shelves stretch into the distance, all filled with books. Their spines are in every language you've ever heard of, and dozens more you haven't. Some seem to hum softly, vibrating like a plucked string, while others release the faintest scent of flowers, smoke, or rain. Memories bound into paper. An elderly woman sits at a desk near the center, her long silver hair braided neatly over one shoulder. She looks up and smiles, as if she's been expecting you. Without speaking, she gestures to a chair across from her. Her hands move quickly, yet gracefully, as she opens a book the size of a dinner plate. The pages are thick, the ink glimmering faintly as though it's still drying. She turns the book toward you. The writing shifts under your gaze. One moment a language you know, the next a script entirely foreign. The story begins in a city you visited, then changes into the account of a sailor who never returned from a voyage, then into a legend about a child who planted stars in the sky. It is history, myth, and dream, bound together without clear edges. The librarian finally speaks, her voice calm but resonant. Every story ever told sinks eventually, but here, they don't vanish. They wait, and sometimes, someone comes to take one back to the surface. You glance at the shelves, wondering how many lifetimes it would take to read them all. She notices your thought without you speaking it, and shakes her head gently. You're not here to read them all. You're here to find the one that's been waiting for you. She leads you to a narrow aisle deep within the library. As you walk, the books seem to lean toward you slightly, as if whispering their titles, hoping to be chosen. You stop at a thin, leather-bound volume with no title at all. When you lift it from the shelf, it feels warm in your hands. The first page contains a single sentence, your own name, written in careful script. The librarian nods, satisfied. Take it. But remember, once you read it, the story changes. It becomes yours. You tuck the book under your arm and follow her back toward the staircase. At the base, She touches your shoulder and says, "When you return to the surface, the lake will not be the same." But neither will you. The climb back up feels longer, the glow of the underwater library fading behind you. When you push open the door, the cool night air greets you. The moon is higher now, casting a silver path across the lake's surface. You row back to shore slowly, the book resting in your lap. On the bank, you pause to look back. The tower is gone, the water perfectly smooth, reflecting only the stars. But when you open the book, the first line has already changed. It reads, "On a still night, by a hidden lake, you began to dream with your eyes open." The words blur slightly as your eyelids grow heavier. The sound of the water, the faint echo of ticking clocks, the scent of old pages, they all mingle into a gentle haze. Somewhere far away, or perhaps very near, a story is still being written, one that will carry you through the night and into the quiet spaces between moments. You close the book. You breathe deeply and slowly, without realizing it. You let the story carry you into sleep. And so, our journey for tonight drifts to a close. You've walked through ancient cities, touched the stones carved by hands long gone, and opened books that remember more than any lifetime could hold. The voices of the past have spoken softly, just enough to carry you beyond the noise of the present. As you rest now, let the echoes of those stories settle like gentle dust across your thoughts. You don't need to hold on to every detail. History will keep them safe for you, ready to return when you wish. All you have to do is breathe, let your eyes grow heavy, and allow the quiet to wrap around you. Until we meet again in another place, in another time, sleep well, dream deeply, and remember, the past is never truly gone. It's simply waiting for you to listen.